Hello, Professor. My name is Diana Bien. I am from Group 5, and we are doing topic number 5 on perception. I'm just the tech of the group, and I helped out with adding the audios and clipping the videos together. So I just wanted to make some acknowledgements and some notes before we got into the presentation. So our team worked really hard, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation. Yeah, so let's get into it. Thank you. Okay, so to begin with, I wanted to present exactly what we were presenting. So we're doing assignment number 3, group, and we are group number 5. We're doing topic number 5 from module 2. Prepare a presentation on perception and the process of receiving information about making sense of the world around us. To discuss the perceptual process, selective attention and confirmation bias. Discuss the perceptual organization, interpretation, categorical thinking, and mental models. Discuss the effects of categorical thinking and mental models in the perceptual process. So the next person I will be playing the audio for is for Abigail Lee, and just one moment here, I will grab her audio and then I will add it to the slide. All right, so I will try to do this really quick, but yeah, so presenting Abigail and her part of the presentation.
Hello everyone. Thank you for taking the time to watch our presentation. Today, my group and I will be talking about perception, specifically the role of perception and how that relates to the world around us. I will first start off by defining perception. So our textbook defines perception as the process of receiving information about and making sense of our surrounding environment. It includes determining which information to notice, how to categorize this information, and how to interpret it within the framework of our existing knowledge. So perception is important to organizational behavior as it influences decision-making and our behavior. In organizational behavior, perception may affect how employees respond in certain situations, deal with certain tasks, and even how others respond to their role in the company. Understanding that we all have perceptions about things and other individuals may help us better understand each other. Now, the rest of my group members will take you through a more in-depth discussion on perception.
Perfect. So that was the end of our first recording, and Alex will be the next person to present. So just one moment here, so that I can grab the audio and add it to the slide. All right, everybody. So I have pulled up Alex's part of the audio, and I'm going to sync it up to his part of the presentation. So please bear with me, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
This model of the perceptual process gives a visual overview as to how the process works and assists in conceptualizing the definition that Abigail has already provided. It also assists by breaking the process down into stages. Firstly, we are subjected to information and stimulation from the world around us via our senses. We take these stimuli in through our 5 senses of feeling, hearing, seeing, smelling, and tasting. Often we receive these stimuli through more than one sense at a time. The stimuli then go through a screening process called selective attention, where our brains review and determine whether information is relevant or irrelevant to the individual. We'll look at selective attention in more detail on the next slide. As part of the selective attention stage, emotional markers are also attached, which assist in storing and recalling information in our memories, as well as the information associated with this memory. Perceptual organization and interpretation is then used to narrow down and understand the stimuli deemed relevant during selective attention. This can involve categorical thinking and the use of mental models, which we will expand on later. The categorization and modeling are interlinked and assist in our final judgment of the stimuli. Studies show this judgment can occur with some accuracy in as little as 1 second. Finally, in the perception process model, our interpretation and judgments are reflected in our overall behavior and attitudes displayed. This is our response to the initially received stimuli after they have been through the entire perceptual process. This model, while sounding complex, occurs thousands of times a day for individuals without them even realizing it. Selective attention is when we filter out stimuli received by our senses that are deemed irrelevant, while allowing other information through to the perceptual interpretation stage of the perceptual process. The diagram shown is called the broadbent filter theory, and it shows how our selective attention works like a bottleneck to narrow down the scope of stimuli received. The way that this information is filtered can be influenced by the characteristics of the person or object being perceived and the context that it is set in, as well as the characteristics of the person doing the perceiving, although the person is not aware that they're being influenced by their own characteristics at the time. A limitation of the selective attention process is that we can filter out important information during the screening process. This is because we base our screening on what we expect to see rather than what is actually occurring. Confirmation bias occurs during the selective attention stage of the perception process. According to the Harvard Business School, confirmation bias is the human tendency to search for, favor, and use information that conforms to one's pre-existing views on a certain topic. As a result of this favoring, we screen out information that opposes our existing views and may give additional weighting to information that conforms to the views that we already hold. An example of this from our textbook is when the police are investigating a crime and come up with a theory of who is guilty early on in the investigation. This theory may then overrule evidence that is found later on in the investigation, which may contradict the earlier theory and mean that less consideration is applied to this evidence. In an extreme case, this could lead to a false conviction due to confirmation bias swaying the investigation.
Okay. So I believe that is the rest of his audio. Let me check. Oh yeah, perfect. So very well spoken, Abigail and Alex so far. So next to present is Troy. And yeah, just one moment, I will be grabbing his audio and one sec. All right, so the next person to be presenting is Troy. I have pulled up his audio, so I'm going to be syncing his part into his part of the PowerPoint presentation. So one moment here. See if I can do this really fast.
Perceiving the world around us. Perceptual organization. We pay attention to a tiny fraction of the stimuli received by our senses. Even so, human beings further reduce the huge volume and complexity of their information received through various perceptual grouping strategies. In perceptual organization, it's a process of grouping these visual elements together so that one can more readily determine the meaning of the visual as a whole. And this perceptual grouping occurs mostly without our awareness, yet is the foundation of making sense of things and fulfilling our need for cognitive closure. The act of explaining, reframing, or otherwise showing our own understanding and accepting of something. In the perceptual interpretation, this is a stage of perception in which we assign the meaning to this information we have selected. There's many factors, but some of the factors that influence our perception are needs and motives, self-concepts such as advertisements, our past experience, our current psychological state, our beliefs, our situational factors, and our cultural upbringing. The most common and far-reaching perceptual grouping process is categorical thinking. This is the non-conscious process of organizing people and objects into preconceived categories that are stored in our long-term memory. And this is the most common perceptual grouping process. Some of the dangers of this categorical thinking, first being compression, which is thinking in terms of categories, which can cause us to forget a variety and treat members of a category if it was more alike than they really are. A classic example of this is when marketers carry out segmentation studies to define target customers. The second danger is amplification, which is exaggerating differences across boundaries, which can also lead to mistakes. Stereotyping isn't just a problem in political and social groups, and it can also have consequences for companies. The third danger would be discrimination, which is favoring one category and failing to pay significant attention to the others that introduce a risk over targeting. If a segmentation study identifies a target customer, advertising spend will typically be partially or fully directed toward them, even if this option is more expensive. And the last danger would be fossilization, is when we allow categories to frame our window view and we limit our horizons. An example would be when beer brands fail to spot the growing number of women customers, or when bicycle manufacturers perish because they continue blindly marketing their products to children, even as millions of adults take up cycling. We see examples of categorical thinking which kills innovation. Lastly, with mental models, there's knowledge structures that we develop to describe, explain, and predict the world around us. To put it simply, mental models are a set of beliefs and ideas that we consciously or unconsciously form based on our experience. They guide our thoughts and behaviors and help us understand life. They're basically thinking tools and shortcuts for our reasoning.
Okay, so good job, Troy. Let me just make sure that his recorded audio is finished. Okay, yep, we're good. So the next part will be my part of the presentation, and I will do this on Zoom. So let's start off. So Troy went over the dangers, and so I'm going to be going over the basics. So let's start off with what is categorical thinking? It is the mostly non-conscious process of organizing people and objects into preconceived categories that are stored in our long-term memory. And you can find that in the textbook on page 67, as we have marked here. To make sense of the information, we use a process called perception grouping. Perception process usually occurs without our awareness. We don't just organize incoming information, we also try to interpret. So there's different perception processes. Categorical thinking is just one of them. One of the other perception processes, so I've just listed a couple, but the first one that I found out was ones where we are grouping different people and individuals together. Be different groups as well, even different groups of animals, anything kind of living related. So people are usually grouped together based on their observable similarities such as gender, age, race, or clothing style. People can also be grouped together based on their similarities like different hobbies or even just being physically in proximities to each other. And then the next perception process is just kind of like information that is not about living people. It's proximities and maybe the location or the physical aspect of it. So I will read it off the slide. Organizing incoming information by filling in the missing pieces of the puzzle. This process involves using past images and experiences to dictate the missing information. Another different perception process that we also do is cognitive closure. And the American Psychology Association has stated two definitions for it that I found was the state in which an individual recognizes that he or she has achieved understanding of something. The final stage in figuratively seeing the total picture and how all pieces of it fit together. So mental models. Like Troy has already hashed on the definition of in his last part of the presentation, I just wanted to break it down a little so we understand what mental models are and how they relate to the perceptual process. Mental models are they're just like roadmaps basically in our mind that we create so that we can kind of achieve different goals with predictability and sanity. So example of some mental models that can either be in abstract form or in physical form. Example one that I have found is it helps us understand what a classroom might look like before we enter a classroom. So if you ever imagine yourself and where you might sit, whether you want to sit with your friends or you just want to sit alone, you imagine where you like to sit by the classroom. So for myself, I always used to have a mental model of wanting to sit beside the window of a classroom if there was a windowed classroom area. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is how it relates to the perception process. And this will tie everything together from what Abigail has said to what Alex has said and to what Troy has said. So how it relates to perception process. Mental models partly rely on the process of perceptual grouping. And perceptual grouping is all the previous stuff that I had already mentioned about. Mental models can help fill in missing pieces of the information, whether it is serious information or casual connections. Mental models help shape perception and behavior. They are thinking tools that you use to understand life, make decisions, and solve problems. Learning a new mental model gives you a new way to see the world. However, it can make it difficult to see the world openly and in different ways. It can also block our recognition of new opportunities. Let's say there's a company and they have a problem and they want to get the problem fixed, but it requires some departments to be involved in fixing this problem. So different departments like accounting, for example, they will see the problem based on an accounting point of view. The marketing department will see it to a marketing point of view, and you can see how it kind of you have to work through the process of fixing a problem through different point of views. So having different mental models is really, really good aspect to helping fix a problem. All right, so I will pull up Abigail's conclusion. 1 second here.
Now, that concludes our presentation for today. I'd like to sum this all up with some of the key points. Today, we learned how external stimuli are key to our individual perceptual experiences, and things like selective attention and confirmation bias help us to better perceive that external stimuli. We also discussed how the process of organization can help us categorize or predict how we should or do respond, as explained by categorical thinking and mental models. Perception is oftentimes these quick judgments we make that are not always correct. Many times we are unaware we are doing this. As we have learned, this can often lead to categorizing people and stereotyping, which can be harmful. So how can we minimize perceptual biases? The textbook gives 3 ways to minimize perceptual biases. One way to minimize these biases is to become more aware they exist. This way, we can be more mindful of our thoughts and actions, although sometimes this may reinforce rather than reduce reliance on stereotypes and tends to be ineffective for people with deeply held prejudices. A second strategy is to become more aware of our biases in our own decisions and behavior. And finally, the third strategy is meaningful interaction, which applies the contact hypothesis that people who interact will be less prejudiced or perceptually biases. So with more interaction with all types of people, we can hopefully work to reduce these. And finally, I would encourage all of you to think about how perceptual biases relate to you and what you can do to change them. Thank you again for your time today.
Okay, and this is our reference page. Just kind of threw it all in. And again, thank you for listening to our presentation.